It can be hard to say goodbye to things you thought would be around forever. How many local eateries did I think I'd be able to enjoy well into old age before they ended up being demolished? We lost Ponderosa and York Steakhouse in the same year. And sadly, this is also the case with the vehicles we've come to love. And if not love, then at least respect. And if not respect, then just sort of accept as a fact of life on these open roadways. But 2024 has been a particularly grave year for automotive longevity. Not only have some truly long-running nameplates been committed to the automotive graveyard, some entire companies have gone on to the great unknown. And it's kind of wild to see so many legendary names bite the dust, but this more or less happens every year, as long-running cars are discontinued for any number of reasons, from poor sales numbers to planned obsolescence and electrification goals. So which cars aren't making it to 2025? Are these cars that will be missed? Or had their time truly come? For the last Roman report of 2024, I'm taking a special look at some of the cars we're leaving behind with our second annual Automotive In Memoriam.
Roman report, it's the end of the year, and I'm happy you're here. Hope you're fond of discussing cars.
Austria-based automaker Fisker ceased vehicle production this year, filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in June, before it was subsequently revealed in July that plans were in place to convert it to Chapter 7 liquidation, which is just a fancy way of saying the company was going out of business. Now that's bad enough when you consider how many people stood to lose jobs, but it gets worse when you consider that this independent electric automaker had already sold several thousand units of their flagship model, the Fisker Ocean, with no real guarantee in place that any of the car's features would even work once the company went under, since Fisker would no longer be around to pay the third-party companies that operated those functions. While it didn't appear that owners would lose critical functions that would prevent the car from operating at all, a Motor Trend report by writer Scott Evans back in June expressed uncertainty about the Fisker Ocean's future reliability. Quote, "Some features, such as navigation and roadside assistance, are handled by third-party companies who have contracts with Fisker. If those companies aren't getting paid, they may decide to cut off their services and render those functions inoperative. Fisker informed owners last month roadside assistance has been cut off, and reports allege it's due to non-payment." End quote. Not even the warranties were offering protection, since you kind of need the company to actually be in business to honor them. This is why when recalls continued to roll in for the Fisker Ocean, owners were pretty much on the hook for the cost of repairs, leaving them SOL, which is why they essentially banded together to solve their own problem. In July, Jalopnik reported on a group of roughly 3,000 Fisker owners who formed the Fisker Owners Association to help keep their cars in working order. A follow-up report in September revealed that the group had successfully established a network of 24 approved Fisker service centers in North America, 21 in the United States, and 3 in Canada. And to add to this victory, the U.S. Department of Justice ruled in October that Fisker could not legally make owners pay for those recall fixes, which included things like stuck door handles, faulty water pumps, and a failing motor control unit. Because even if Fisker promised to reimburse owners for paying the cost of their recall fixes, that still conflicted directly with U.S. law. As the Reuters report cites, quote, "The Justice Department also said that the part of the plan where vehicle owners could get reimbursed for paying for repairs out of their pocket also violates the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act. Fisker is also being investigated by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, which objects to the liquidation plan, citing the lack of clarity on how and whether Fisker intends to preserve its corporate records." End quote. A Delaware judge did eventually approve Fisker's liquidation plan later that month, with Fisker agreeing to cover the cost of the recall repairs. But at this point, it almost seems as if it would have been better for Fisker to have never existed in the first place, because it gives an air of vanity to thrust a product onto the automotive marketplace before it's even ready. Which is not to say that long-standing automakers haven't done just that in the past, but there is a certain grace that's afforded to an automaker on the downswing when they've previously proven that they can deliver a quality vehicle. While Henrik Fisker had more of a past in the auto industry than Elon Musk did before Tesla, designing cars for BMW, Aston Martin, and even Ford, he didn't seem to actually create a product anybody truly wanted to buy. My read on it is that the Fisker Ocean never really came across as a vehicle meant to imbue the public with a whole lot of trust, so much as elicit curiosity that would then stoke interest. Yet that didn't really happen, you know? And given the outcomes, it's hard to argue it wasn't for the best. I almost can't believe this, but it's time to eulogize the Camaro. So in the mid-1960s, Ford was on top of the world following the release of the Mustang, and other American automakers were playing catch-up. Chevrolet was one such automaker who decided their best offense was, well, a good offense. So they went on creating a rear-wheel drive muscle car in two-door convertible and coupe configurations, and standard, super sport, and rally sport trims. Never mind that, much like the Nissan and Honda merger talks I talked about last week, the automotive press got hold of the story before any announcements were ready to be made. The Camaro was unveiled on June 28, 1966, in a press conference at the Statler Hilton Hotel in Detroit by Chevrolet General Manager E.M. Pete Estes, while the Camaro was described as, quote, a small, vicious animal that eats Mustangs, end quote. It avoided the real answer behind the journalists' questions regarding just what a Camaro is. One story behind the name Camaro, from author David Newhart's 2013 book, The Complete Book of Camaro, Every Model Since 1967, states that it was chosen because it was French slang for friend, pal, or comrade, which follows from Pete Estes' remark about how the car's name, quote, suggests the comradeship of good friends, as a personal car should be to its owner, end quote. Either way, when the Camaro eventually did hit the market for model year 1967, it offered both small and big block V8 options, combining performance and style with decent affordability, as the base model in 1966 retailed for $2,466, or $24,012 today. For comparison, the outgoing Camaro retails for roughly $32,000. Yet despite these advantages, the Camaro struggled to keep pace with the Mustang. As depicted in a Car and Driver sales chart in 2015, the Mustang routinely dog-walked the Camaro for much of its first two generations. For example, in its first year for 1967, it sold 220,906 units. However, this was the same year that the Mustang got a refresh and Ford debuted the 390 V8. And naturally, the Mustang was still immensely popular 3 years in, already becoming one of the defining cars of the 1960s. So it's not really that surprising that the Mustang sold 472,121 units, more than double the incoming Camaro numbers. It would be the largest sales gap of the Camaro's brief 2-year first generation, and the biggest until 1974, when the Mustang II debuted and the Camaro received a mid-cycle refresh. But a dedicated and loyal community, aided by the gradual muscle car surge throughout the 1960s and 70s, along with the gradually increasing quality and options for these cars, helped the Camaro gain popularity in the years and decades that followed. The Camaro would outsell the Mustang for the first time in 1977, the year which saw the return of the Z28 after its 1975 discontinuation. It sold 218,853 units to the Mustang's 153,173 units. And this would happen for 4 consecutive years in the next decade, in 1982, 83, 84, and 85. Although it would only outsell the Mustang once in the entire decade of the 1990s, and even then only just barely. Despite refreshes and upgrades like the reintroduction of the convertible in 1994 and the debut of the LS1 in 1998, sales fell off a cliff so that by 2002, the Camaro was shelved for 8 years as General Motors went back to the drawing board. No, this isn't even the first time the Camaro has died. When it returned in 2010, it came sporting a 6-speed manual and over 400 horsepower. And for the next 5 years, it either outsold or remained roughly even with the Mustang in sales numbers, being one of Chevrolet's more consistent performers. But unfortunately, sales would decline in subsequent years as production costs would rise. By the end of the 2010s, sales dropped from an already low 48,265 units to 29,775 units. While the Camaro would see a small bump in 2023 to just over 31,000 units sold, the numbers were already trending in favor of SUVs, pickups, and electric vehicles. People weren't going for muscle cars, much less a muscle car that hadn't been the industry leader in years. Couple this with General Motors shifting away from gasoline-powered cars as a strategy, the reality is that it just didn't make sense to invest in producing this anymore. Will the Camaro rise from the ashes again at some point in the future? Well, Chevrolet has already expressed a desire to bring it back for a 7th generation at some point. But even without that assurance, I feel like the odds were pretty good that it would come back anyway. But I'd imagine it's likely to go the way of the Mustang Mach-E, because that's the direction most automakers are headed these days. And in a way, it would be history repeating itself, wouldn't it? If the Camaro were to come back as an EV to chase after the Mustang Mach-E's audience, once again playing catch-up to Ford's cultural mainstay. And maybe that's the real story here, the cyclical nature of the auto industry, even when it's purporting to innovate. The idea that even while things change, the familiar rivalries and struggles remain in place. A war to be waged in a new theater, with a new generation carrying the old flags, fighting for different but necessary ideals. Ultimately, while I could easily see the Camaro coming back again, this is basically farewell for the internal combustion version. Rev in peace, Camaro. So it looks like the Audi A4 is getting the chop this year, despite this essentially being a technicality. Yes, it's going away, but also, is it really? Well, in the literal sense it is, but really it seems like Audi is just slotting the A5 sedan into the A4's place, as this appears to be the end for the internal combustion version of the A4. The A4 nameplate will continue as part of Audi's new naming strategy in which all even-numbered cars like the A4 will be electric, while odd-numbered cars like the A5 will be gas-powered. Now, the A5 Coupe and Cabriolet will also be sunsetting this year, but the A5 sedan will essentially fill the same internal combustion luxury compact executive niche that the A4 served. with an S model that boosts output to 362 turbocharged horses, although this would still leave it trailing behind the BMW M340i's 382 horsepower turbocharged inline-six, and again, it's part of a cyclical narrative, as this essentially mirrors the ongoing story of the Audi A4 competing with the BMW 3 Series for much of its existence, and depending on whom you ask, either coming up woefully short or being savagely underrated. So let's talk about it a bit. Bursting onto the scene in 1994, great year, with over 120,000 units sold in Europe, the Audi A4 competed not only with the 3 Series, but also the Mercedes C-Class, which had only just released a year earlier. The A4 was a luxury compact executive sedan with a more dynamic, sportier feel than the outgoing Audi 80. We didn't get it stateside right away, but once it arrived for model year 1996, it sold similarly well. It found its basis in the Volkswagen B5 platform and boasted a turbocharged 1.8-liter four-cylinder engine, although these could also be outfitted with a 2.8-liter V6. A Porsche-derived manually shiftable automatic transmission was an available option, but the standard for that first generation was the 5-speed manual. Over the subsequent generations, the A4 established a healthy reputation for Audi as a luxury automaker you shouldn't necessarily overlook just because it didn't have a 3-pointed star or a blue and white checkered flag on its hood. In a time where standard manual transmissions weren't always, standard, it was impressive that the A4 kept it going longer than most, as it wasn't until 2017 when the standard transmission for the A4 wasn't a manual. And it wasn't until 2019 that you couldn't get one with a manual at all. In 4 separate decades, the Audi A4 had this reputation for customer satisfaction. You might not hear people going bonkers for this car in the way you would for your BMWs or your Porsches, but the people who love the A4 really love the A4. And having driven them before, I can't say I disagree with the fandom, which is why it's probably good news that it'll still be around in some form. But still, technicality or not, this is the end of the A4 that traces its history back to 1994. Sad to see you go, but happy to see some version of you sticking around. R.I.P. Another gas-powered compact sedan meets its end at the hands of electrification as we say goodbye to the Volvo S60. And it's slotted more or less in a similar position as the A4, albeit with less fanfare, it would seem. For a car that has lasted nearly 25 years and 3 model generations, you'd think there'd be a little more to commemorate here, but there really isn't. A spokesperson for Volvo told Motor One in June that the company was ending S60 production in order to, quote, focus on the all-new EX90, end quote. It's an odd statement considering that they don't appear to serve the same market segment, since one is a sedan and the other is a 3-row electric EV. But I guess the quote is less saying we're replacing the S60 with the EX90 and more we need resources for the EX90 that are being taken away by the S60. And really, you can sort of draw a comparison between the two in the sense that the S60 already offers a plug-in hybrid version, which makes it particularly strange to discontinue it now, given the sudden resurgence for hybrids, which last week's Roman report talks about in depth, as it caught Nissan completely off guard, resulting in a big missed opportunity when they opted to dedicate all their R&D resources to making electrification happen sooner. It seems like companies who have dedicated hybrids have an advantage. So why is Volvo getting rid of one of theirs? Well, it might have been a pricing issue, as the plug-in hybrid still retails for around $52,100, which is more than the current BMW 330e and the Alfa Romeo Tonale, according to a Car and Driver cataloging of current plug-in hybrids. Regardless of the reason, the statement from the Volvo representative just seems like a polite way of avoiding the elephant in the room, which is the poor sales for the S60, which hasn't gotten much higher than 12,000 units in the past 3 years, according to the Motor One article, which notes that the BMW 3 Series and the Mercedes C-Class each sold nearly 3 times as many units. The EX90 will retail for $79,995, so I suppose the hope is still to capture a luxury clientele that's willing to spend big for what they seem to believe will be the next EV fixation. It's supposedly offering range in the 300 region, along with nearly 500 horsepower, and honestly, it should offer something to justify a starting price tag that's over double that of the current EX30. Now, I don't know that the S60 will necessarily be mourned to the extent of so many other sedans being discontinued, but it does carry on the unsettling trend of sedans being written off in larger numbers. Yes, many will continue as electric options, but the electric option isn't always as affordable as its internal combustion counterpart. Of course, the counterargument that I think a lot of automakers are relying on is that while you may pay more upfront for an EV, you'll pay less over the life of the vehicle. And I think this is partially what emboldens automakers to charge what they do. Not just a desire for a larger return on the production cost of an EV, but the knowledge that the market will bear these high prices because people are willing to pay a bigger buy-in on the hopes of making it up on the back end, whether through fuel savings, service savings, or federal EV tax credits. In this sense, any resurgence for hybrids is seen as short-term as automakers move towards full electrification en masse, forcing the reluctant hand of motorists looking for new cars and lower lifetime costs. As a result, the S60 becomes a disposable sacrifice on the altar of electrification and profit margins, as so many cars have been and will be in the years ahead. Alright, so for the Jaguar F-Type here, and actually at this point in general, I'm just going to stop talking about how X car is being discontinued because the company plans to go fully electric, you know? Let's just accept that that's the case from here on out, coupled with something like poor sales or the market drifting away from whatever car is being shelved. It's typically one of those or some combination of them all. And frankly, this is a whole other fresh influx of absurdity because after spending over a half hour back in October talking about their bizarre plan to take a gap year and not make any new cars before going fully electric in 2026, Jaguar went and did a total rebranding. New logo, new EV line, a car called the Type 0 that for all the world looks like a remote control for a high-end stereo system. Jaguar has no desire to be loved by everybody. Yeah, it looks like they're well on their way. But all this change towards electrification meant that Jaguar ended production on the E-Pace, the I-Pace, the XF, and yes, the F-Type, a car I naively thought might stick around as a bone for enthusiasts and to keep a single toe in the internal combustion business. But I guess that was my own fault for not staying up to date on Jaguar's market strategy until I actually started researching for that video a few months back. The F-Type is a car that deserves a lot more attention than it gets in enthusiast circles, in my opinion. Jaguar could have gone with a more ostentatious look, or maybe gone smaller and lower to the ground, really cramp you in there. which really feels like the automotive equivalent of a high-end restaurant charging you a whole bunch of money for a very small portion. But either way, it seemed like they made this car just curvy and small enough and low enough to give you good aerodynamics, which, when coupled with the road feel, the raw power, that exhaust note, and the kind of looks this gets you, makes for one hell of a driving experience. And look, while I'm sure the Type 0 will offer a car that is theoretically better in most ways, whether through fuel savings alone or just pure acceleration, taking all of those things into consideration, even if the Type 0 ends up being better, it still feels like a genuine loss to have a car like the F-Type discontinued, as it provided a last remaining link to that heritage and tradition that Jaguar boasts about so proudly, while seemingly rushing to get away from it. Of course, I know that automakers have to evolve to survive, and kudos to Jaguar for being forward-looking. But even with the amount of time they've put into this, announcing their electrification intentions as far back as 2021, something about this still feels kind of abrupt, you know? But then, this is the automotive equivalent of ripping off the Band-Aid, right? Because why pretend that there's still going to be a future for internal combustion? Why not just get on with the show? And that's what Jaguar is doing, for better or worse, at the cost of a gem like the F-Type. Still, I'm glad we got it in the first place. On the subject of luxury sports cars, the Lamborghini Huracan is one of the most prolific high-end options because it's essentially the starter Pokemon of Lambos, which makes it no less desirable or exclusive to an average guy like me. The Lamborghini Huracan debuted online, believe it or not, just 11 years ago in December 2013, before having its world premiere at the Geneva Auto Show in March 2014. Oddly, the Huracan is the kind of car that feels like it's been around a whole hell of a lot longer than it actually has been. Moreover, it almost feels like a legacy nameplate unto itself, despite existing below the top of the range for Lamborghinis, and despite the notion that being below the top means it should, in theory, be more accessible. Yet you could argue that it really isn't, because Lamborghinis generally aren't accessible to your average Joe. It's a loss that follows from last year's demise of the Audi R8, with which the Huracan shares a 5.2-liter V10 engine, although the Lamborghini version is modified for more power. The Huracan is a car that presents the argument that maybe not all experiences should be accessible, even the ones that nominally are accessible. Because this car is an argument for exclusion, because even the base model of the starter Lambo costs a cool $250,000, with the Huracan STO going for close to $100,000 more than that. It's saying that this is an experience that, by its very nature, not everyone can have, thereby making it more desirable. Yet it fetches that high dollar value because it's designed to be an experience worth having. Moreover, an experience worth bragging about having. I have no first-hand experience with these cars, and my fondness for them is mostly the byproduct of my nephew growing up loving the Huracan. It's his dream car, and while I've mostly tried to instill in him an appreciation for, cheaper things, he's passed this reverence for them upwards to me, and I can appreciate the draw that these cars have. A combination of unfettered acceleration and high-end curb appeal that isn't actually curb appeal because you'd have to be insane to park this on a curb. Yet the Huracan has seen its final day to be supplanted by the plug-in hybrid Temerario. Temerario? I don't think I'd have ever predicted that direction, but it does show an acknowledgement of the aforementioned moment hybrids are currently having, as even luxury enthusiasts are looking for something that straddles the line between the savings of an EV and the performance of internal combustion. But for now, well, see you in the next life, Huracan. Maybe I'll be able to afford you there. You ever have a celebrity pass away and you're in shock because you could have sworn that they'd passed ages ago? Like when it broke that Phil Donahue passed earlier this year, biggest daytime talk show host of the 80s, appointment television across America. When word broke that he'd passed, I was just baffled because I could have sworn he'd been dead for decades, which I suppose is a byproduct of how, because no one ever seems to truly retire in the entertainment industry, you just sort of assume that if you're not hearing about them anymore, they must have croaked. Or maybe it's just proof of the Mandela effect. Either way, that's sort of the Chevy Malibu to me. When word broke that it was being discontinued, with the last one rolling off the production line in November, it came as a surprise to me because I didn't even know they were still making them. Maybe a better analogy is that the Malibu is the automotive equivalent of Grey's Anatomy. What do you mean that show is still on? What do you mean it's still successful? For all my hand-wringing about how economical gasoline-powered sedans are gradually fading away, I didn't even really notice the demise of the Malibu, which is Chevrolet's final gas-powered sedan. It's an underwhelming end to a model that was among Chevy's most successful sedans ever manufactured, selling approximately 10 million cars across 9 model generations. Although part of me wonders how many of those 10 million cars were from airport rental fleets. Oddly, my fondness for the Malibu is mostly limited to the 2002 model year, since it was one of the very first cars I ever got to drive in my youth. But at no point was I under the impression that it was some great car. Maybe previous generations were. Maybe subsequent generations were. I don't know, but at least for that time period, it was more that I recognized how perfectly it slotted into the lives of people who just needed any car and didn't really care about what, so long as it was sufficiently comfortable and wasn't actively in the process of breaking down. The Malibu has that scrappy, underdog characteristic to it, that because it's so invisible, it's almost kind of endearing. Much like the Camaro, this isn't the first time the Malibu has been discontinued, as it was canned in model year 1983. Its 4th generation overall, yet its first as its own model, having begun life as a trim on the Chevelle. And it's been a relatively consistent part of Chevrolet's catalog outside of its brief decade-long discontinuation prior to returning in 1997. But bringing in solid numbers relative to cost and expectations isn't really enough when market trends are moving away from this sort of thing altogether, at least in its gas-powered form. If nothing else, the Chevrolet Malibu is a loss for affordable American-made sedans and rental car services across the nation. One of the last sub-$20,000 cars on the market has left the building, despite continuing to post exactly the kind of increased sales numbers you'd expect of a sub-$20,000 car in this economic environment. Yes, the Mitsubishi Mirage is being discontinued, which includes both the Mirage hatchback and the G4 sedan, leaving the Nissan Versa as the only new car you can have for less than the cost of 900 copies of E.T. the Extraterrestrial in 4K off Amazon. And not even then, because the Versa is allegedly due to be discontinued sometime in 2025, so that's pretty much a wrap on the most affordable avenues into new car ownership. Of course, let's not pretend like either the Versa or the Mirage are particularly mind-blowing cars. The Mirage is exactly what you'd expect of a car whose only apparent purpose seems to be the creation of motion. It's not flashy, it's not spectacular, and it's not really supposed to be. It's the Malibu of the Mitsubishi lineup, and like the Malibu, it's continued to sell reasonably well, even if the numbers clearly aren't what they used to be. There was actually an increase in Mirage sales in 2024, with the car selling some 24,000 units this year, making it the second best-selling Mitsubishi of the year, behind the Outlander. For comparison, a Jalopnik article from October found that the company had sold just 9,344 units by the same point in 2023. Now, whether this is indicative of the strength of the Mirage or the weakness of Mitsubishi, which has its own issues as part of the Nissan, Renault, and maybe potentially Honda portfolio, I don't know. But unfortunately, this late surge doesn't appear to be enough to save the Mirage. Although what's more peculiar to me is that Mitsubishi doesn't appear to be replacing it with anything. They're seemingly just pressing forward, despite the obvious gap in the market that these increased sales are suggesting will need to be filled. While I don't know that the death of the Mirage is the death of affordable new cars in perpetuity, much less the death of good, affordable new cars, I do think it represents a change in ideology in the auto industry. A car made cheaply and sold cheaply probably brings in less money than a more expensively produced model that can be sold at a premium, even if the volumes are lower. Doubly so if it leads to a boost in public perception, but then that's all just theorizing on my part. For now, we lower the casket on another affordable car, and that alone is worth mourning, regardless of that car's quality in life. Now, before I throw to the Oscars-style In Memoriam montage for the rest of the dearly departed vehicles of 2024, I would like to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to our channel and making sure the bell icon is tapped so you're notified. And please consider leaving a like or a comment or even sharing the video. Let's get some discussions going. And if you'd like to have our back in an even bigger way, please consider supporting us on Patreon so we can continue to bring you the best content we possibly can in 2025. The link is in the description. Unfortunately, I couldn't go too in-depth on every single one of the roughly 25 vehicles being discontinued, and I'm doing my best to make sure that this montage doesn't miss any, but no guarantees, I guess. With that said, I hope I offered you a decent look into the variety of the cars leaving us in 2024. And I'd love to know your thoughts on these cars that are going away, and which cars you'll be missing, which cars you'll be glad to be rid of, and if you had to say goodbye to a personal car you loved or hated this year. I love reading stories, man, so give me anything you've got. I hope 2024 was better for you than it was for these cars. Have a wonderful, safe, and happy new year, and may 2025 offer you better than you even thought possible. It's been a long night, it'll be over soon. This too shall pass, as nights do. The thought of your face, another calm lake, the holiday games, the corny jokes that might have been made. Oh, thoughts about you, what echoes amount to a dream of long nights and coffee that the words flow through. This too shall pass, as once do. Sometimes the world I know is better than I've known, but sometimes, for all I've grown, I miss the great unknown. Fireside talks alone with a similar face to mine. Oh, beyond the cold and snow, another green place to drive. Looking at the past ahead, futures in a day gone by, fishing by the riverbed. Let's try fabricated memories. Yesterday's a box can hold. Memories of love to life in film rolls. From warm nights to road salt. From bug bites to cold walks. You were making it up, and I think I am too. Passing on old traits as we do. Sometimes the world I know is better than I've known, but sometimes for all I've grown, I miss the great unknown. Fireside talks alone with a similar face to mine. Beyond the cold and snow, another green place to drive. Let's go, anywhere the dirt finds road. 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 Sometimes the world I know is better than I've known, but sometimes for all I've grown, I miss the great unknown. Fireside talks alone with a similar face to mine.